Hello, my cherished family. It's wonderful to have you back at Wisdom Post Stories, a place where our souls unite through powerful narratives. We begin with gratitude. Divine Creator, thank you for connecting us across oceans and mountains today. Protect, strengthen, and inspire each listener through stories filled with wisdom and compassion. Amen. Tell me, from which part of our beautiful planet are you watching? Did previous stories touch your heart? Your thoughts bring warmth and meaning to this gathering. It was precisely 10 o'clock at night when the harsh pounding at my front door shattered the silence. My heart skipped a beat. Who could it be at this ungodly hour? Such forceful knocking meant urgency, or perhaps danger. I rose cautiously, nerves tightening, each step heavier than the last. As I approached, my breath quickened, my mind racing with troubling possibilities. Gathering my courage, I opened the door, only to recoil in shock. Standing before me was my sister Sidra, shrouded head to toe in a shawl, her face pale and eyes darting anxiously around as if being pursued. Beside her stood Abdullah, her 12-year-old son, who clung to his mother, his face shadowed by confusion and fatigue. "Sidra, what are you doing here at this hour? Is everything okay?" I managed, my voice barely audible above the pulse throbbing in my ears. My sister rarely visited. Our meetings were sparse and formal at best, dictated by her stern in-laws who disapproved of our closeness. Seeing her standing here now, unannounced and distressed, sent chills cascading down my spine. She hesitated, glancing nervously behind her, as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. Her voice trembled as she spoke hurriedly. "I can't stay. I don't have much time. Please, take Abdullah. Look after him. Consider him my trust, my amanat. I must go back immediately." Her words made no sense. Amanat? Trust? A surge of panic surged through me. "Sidra, at least come inside. It's late. Your home is far. How did you get here alone? Stay for a moment. Let me arrange someone to take you back. Shahzaman will drop you himself." "No," she interrupted sharply, eyes wide with terror. "You don't understand. There's no time. I have to go back now." She glanced down at Abdullah, squeezing his shoulder briefly. "Please, just promise me you'll keep him safe. Don't ask questions. Not yet. I'll explain everything soon." With those cryptic words, Sidra turned abruptly, vanishing into the night. I stood frozen at the doorway, heart racing, my thoughts swirling like a storm. Why the secrecy, the fear etched into her expression? What danger had pushed her to entrust Abdullah to me, a sister she hardly saw, let alone relied upon? Slowly, I brought Abdullah inside, trying to mask my own confusion with a comforting smile. But it was futile. My hands trembled as I shut the door behind us. I attempted small talk, hoping to uncover some clues. "Abdullah, did something happen at home? Why did your mother leave you here like this?" The boy only shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, Auntie. Ammi told me nothing. She woke me up, brought me here, and left. She just said she'd come back in a day or two." His voice was small, lost. I nodded gently, concealing my own dread. "You're safe here. We'll sort it out." Though how exactly I would do that remained unclear. At that moment, my husband, Shahzaman, stepped into the room, freshly showered and wearing a puzzled expression. "What's Abdullah doing here?" I quickly recounted the strange encounter with Sidra. His reaction stunned me. Instead of sympathy, irritation clouded his face. "Have you lost your senses?" he snapped sharply, glaring at me. "Taking responsibility for someone else's child without thinking about the consequences? You know what Sidra's husband is like. Shahwise is a volatile man, hot-headed, ready to create scenes at the slightest provocation. If he finds out Abdullah is here, there'll be a scandal at our doorstep." His words, cold and sharp, echoed painfully through the room. I stared at him in disbelief, wounded by his indifference, especially with Abdullah standing right there, absorbing every harsh word. Realizing my distress, Shahzaman softened slightly, stepping closer and lowering his voice. "Listen, just for tonight. Tomorrow you must call Sidra and insist she take Abdullah back. We can't afford trouble from her family. I won't have drama at my door." He didn't wait for my response. Instead, he abruptly turned and headed towards his mother's room, disappearing without another word. My heart sank, heavy with humiliation and anxiety. Abdullah had heard everything. The child's gaze remained fixed on the floor, his young face etched with quiet resignation and confusion. I gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you hungry, Abdullah? Would you like something to eat?" "No, thank you," he replied softly, eyes still downcast. Understanding he needed space, I led him to my children's room, settling him comfortably for the night. He quickly bonded with my own kids, momentarily distracted from the strange circumstances. As I turned to leave, he whispered softly, "Thank you, Auntie." Returning to my bedroom, the weight of the night's events pressed heavily on my heart. Shahzaman, already sitting on the bed, spoke without looking up. "I told Amma about Abdullah. She agrees. It's too risky keeping him. You have to send him back tomorrow. We can't trust his father. He could file charges, accuse us of kidnapping, anything." His words sliced through my nerves. Kidnapping? Charges? Was he serious? My own husband, whom I'd relied on for support, now spoke like a stranger concerned only for himself. The cold, distant tone of his voice felt unfamiliar, unsettling. Sleep evaded me that night. The mysterious urgency in Sidra's eyes, the tremor in her voice, and now my husband's harsh warnings spun endlessly through my mind. What danger could have driven Sidra to take such drastic measures? And what kind of man had she married? One whose very name brought fear to my husband's heart. As dawn approached, shadows in the corners of my room seemed darker, longer, more menacing. My mind was flooded with troubling questions and vague dread. Sidra's cryptic words echoed again and again. Consider him my Amanat. What sinister secret had my sister thrust into my care? And could I protect Abdullah, or even myself, from whatever nightmare had pushed Sidra into the darkness that night? Little did I know then, this was only the beginning of a storm far greater and more terrifying than any I'd imagined. I let out a weary sigh, turning restlessly in bed. My mind was caught in an agonizing tug-of-war between my husband's warnings and my sister's desperate trust. Sidra's innocent face, her anxious eyes and trembling voice haunted me as I lay awake, staring blankly at the ceiling. Sidra, my younger sister, was as pure as untouched snow, her heart filled with compassion, yet fate seemed determined to crush her beneath its ruthless heel. Once inseparable, we had grown up more as best friends than siblings, sharing secrets, laughter, and tears. Our bond had felt unbreakable, forged by endless whispered conversations in the quiet of night. But marriages changed everything, pulling us into separate worlds, transforming closeness into distant formality. I had married Shahzaman, a man who offered security and respect despite his arrogance and pride. Sidra, however, had been less fortunate. Her marriage to Shawaiz, a man known for his fiery temper and suspicious nature, brought nothing but sorrow. Shawaiz controlled her every move, restricting her visits, severing her connections to family and friends, isolating her until she faded into a shadow of her former self. Gradually, our interactions dwindled to occasional family gatherings, where Sidra would sit timidly in a corner, eyes filled with a quiet fear. I still remember the day I learned that Shawaiz had taken away her phone, cutting off her final link to me. After that, our communication was limited to hushed exchanges at rare gatherings, Sidra's eyes always darting anxiously, as if speaking too openly would invite punishment. Abdullah, her 12-year-old son, was her only solace, though he too appeared subdued and withdrawn. A quiet boy, he never spoke much, shying away from social interactions. Last night's surprise arrival of Sidra and Abdullah at my doorstep had ignited an unshakable dread in me, a mystery I couldn't unravel, no matter how hard I tried. Now, lying awake in the suffocating darkness, I wrestled with uncertainty. Should I honor my sister's desperate trust, or succumb to my husband's pragmatic demands? Morning arrived abruptly, slicing through my confusion like a blade. Dawn prayers echoed through the neighborhood, a faint reassurance I barely noticed. It was in that moment of fragile peace that Shahzaman stormed into the room, his face ashen, eyes flickering with disbelief and anger. My heart tightened. "What happened?" I asked cautiously, sitting up, fear already clawing at my throat. He swallowed hard, avoiding my eyes at first, then finally met my gaze. "Sidra is dead," he said bluntly. The coldness in his voice pierced my heart like ice. She hanged herself from the ceiling fan last night. Shawai's just called. For a moment, everything stopped. My vision blurred, the world spinning violently around me. Breath caught painfully in my lungs. No, you must be mistaken, I whispered, shaking my head in denial. Sidra, no, she wouldn't. It's true, Shahzaman interrupted harshly. His tone held no compassion, only frustration. Now Shawais is already asking about Abdullah. Do you realize the trouble you've dragged us into? Everyone will wonder why Sidra left Abdullah with us just before killing herself. They'll assume she confided in us. I warned you not to meddle in their affairs. I stared at him, stunned, my grief swiftly replaced by anger. Yet words refused to leave my lips. The cold practicality of my husband had always baffled me. But this bordered on cruelty. I rose silently, my movements mechanical, as I prepared Abdullah to return home. The boy, innocent and oblivious, dressed quietly, unaware of the terrible storm awaiting him. We reached Sidra's house under a heavy veil of silence. Mourners had already gathered, whispering in corners, eyes filled with morbid curiosity. Abdullah's steps slowed, sensing something terribly wrong, and then he saw her, his mother, his protector, wrapped lifelessly in a white shroud. His anguished scream ripped through the air, echoing unbearably off the walls. Yet no comforting arms reached for him. Shahwais stood aloof, his face hardened, eyes burning with contempt as they moved from Abdullah to Sidra's lifeless form. In that instant, my heart sank, recognizing the ugly truth behind Sidra's unbearable silence. But Shahwais was not finished. In a voice loud enough to shatter hearts, he declared, Sidra was an immoral woman, a shameless betrayer. Who knows whose blood runs through this boy's veins? She burdened me with someone else's child, then took her own life to escape the shame. His words exploded through the room, igniting a wildfire of murmurs. My knees weakened. The floor beneath me seemed to vanish. Abdullah stood paralyzed, tears streaming silently down his face, his innocence publicly shattered. Accusations spread like wildfire, tarnishing Sidra's memory before she could even rest in peace. My mind reeled, refusing to accept Shawais's vile words. Sidra had always been pure, gentle. How could this terrible lie be allowed to stand? I looked desperately around the room, hoping someone, anyone, would speak up, defend her honor, but the silence was deafening. Beside me, Shahzaman shifted uncomfortably, his eyes cast downward. His silence spoke louder than words. Reputation and status were more important to him than truth or loyalty, and he'd already calculated the damage to his own dignity. My heart broke once more as I realized how alone Sidra truly had been. The funeral was carried out swiftly, Sidra's story buried with her beneath the cold earth. But the pain lingered, festering quietly in my soul. Abdullah returned home with Shawais, his fate uncertain, his innocence lost, and I was left alone, haunted by questions that clawed endlessly at my conscience. What secret had driven Sidra to her desperate act? Why had she entrusted Abdullah to me, even briefly, before choosing death? Was it protection she sought for her son, or revenge against the man who had stolen her happiness? Weeks passed, but peace eluded me. Nights were filled with restless dreams, visions of Sidra's terrified face, begging for justice. And then, unexpectedly, I received a message, a crumpled note delivered anonymously. Don't believe Shahwais. Sidra's death was no suicide. Be careful. You might be next. My blood ran cold. The note slipped from trembling fingers, fluttering gently to the floor. A sinister web surrounded my sister's death, darker and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. Sidra had paid the ultimate price, but the threat wasn't finished. It was only just beginning. As shadows closed in, I realized grimly, Sidra's silence was not the end, but the start of a terrifying journey, one I must endure to uncover a chilling truth hidden beneath layers of betrayal and deception. Every whisper felt like a dagger piercing my heart. The scandalous murmurs swirled around me as mourners shook their heads, muttering words of condemnation, their hands raised in solemn repentance. I stood frozen, unable to speak, glancing helplessly from Abdullah's innocent, bewildered face to Sidra's lifeless body now shrouded in a stark white cloth. Her once vibrant eyes were closed forever, holding within them secrets I'd never know. The burial was rushed, as if the earth itself couldn't wait to conceal the shame whispered by Shawais. The man who had vowed to protect my sister had instead destroyed her, tainting her memory even in death. Just as the grave swallowed my sister's lifeless form, Shawais turned on his own son, violently pushing Abdullah out the door, casting him into the unforgiving world. I watched in shock, heart pounding wildly. Without a second thought, I grabbed Abdullah's trembling hand and led him to my home, ignoring Shahzaman's angry protests. He voiced his objection harshly, his words stinging with bitterness. "This is not our child. We can't take responsibility for a child whose father won't even claim him. Send him back." "Send him back?" I echoed, disbelief seizing my heart. Where would I send him? Shawais refuses to acknowledge Abdullah as his own son. He's cast him aside, rejected him. This child is now utterly alone. Can't you see? A fierce argument erupted between us, one of many to come, but I fought desperately, eventually wearing down Shahzaman's resistance. He grudgingly agreed on one harsh condition, that Abdullah would stay only temporarily, until he was old enough to fend for himself. Then he would have to leave. My parents were no longer alive, unable to shelter Abdullah in their embrace. My only brother had long distanced himself after our marriages, building barriers of cold indifference. Even a desperate plea to my sister-in-law had ended in abrupt refusal, leaving Abdullah's life solely in my reluctant hands. Yet the venom Shahzaman spat pierced deeper than mere disagreements. He questioned Abdullah's parentage, echoed the cruel accusations hurled by Shawais at Sidra's funeral. Who knows whose blood he carries? Shawais wouldn't disown his son without reason. Sidra wouldn't take her life unless hiding a shameful truth. Every vicious word felt like a blade twisting into my heart. My pure, gentle Sidra, accused of betrayal, her honor dragged mercilessly through the mud. Anger boiled within me, an urge to defend my sister's innocence rising fiercely. But I swallowed back the words, painfully aware of my helplessness. Challenging my husband risked losing my own children's security, and now Abdullah's fragile existence depended on my silence. Months blurred into a restless cycle of fear and tension. Every morning brought fresh confrontations with Shahzaman and bitter remarks from my mother-in-law. Still, I endured silently, determined that Abdullah would never sense the burden his presence had become. But Abdullah's needs were growing. He needed food, clothing, education, things Shahzaman openly refused to provide. Gathering my courage, I emptied my own modest savings, scraping together enough money to enroll him in school. To sustain his expenses, I secretly began sewing clothes at home, earning just enough to buy him milk, clothes, books, and a fleeting glimpse of normalcy. My nights were sleepless, haunted by Sidra's desperate final visit, her anxious eyes, trembling voice, the unanswered questions. Why had she chosen death? Why had she left Abdullah to me? Time after time, I gently probed Abdullah, hoping he'd recall something crucial, some clue behind his mother's tragedy. But his responses remained vague, uncertain. Could it have been Shahwais's cruelty that pushed her over the edge? Had his merciless accusations finally broken her spirit? Or was there another hidden truth, something darker, even more sinister, lurking beneath the surface? Every theory led only to more uncertainty, wrapping me in helpless despair. A full year passed, yet my sister's death still felt like yesterday's tragedy. Each day I saw Sidra's reflection vividly etched into Abdullah's quiet, thoughtful face. Protecting him became my obsession, defying every criticism, silencing every whisper aimed at his innocent heart. Yet amidst my quiet sacrifices, something shifted within Abdullah, something unseen, unnoticed. In my determination to shield him, I had failed to realize that this quiet 12-year-old boy was no longer a child. The trauma he'd endured had aged him prematurely. His silences were no longer merely those of innocence. They hid dark thoughts, brooding resentments, and concealed questions I had never anticipated. He had begun watching silently, observing carefully. Perhaps he remembered more than he'd admitted, more about that dreadful night, more about his father's accusations. Maybe he'd pieced together the fragments I had overlooked. One evening, after finishing my sewing, I found Abdullah standing silently by the window, staring into the darkness beyond. Abdullah, I called softly. He turned slowly, eyes glistening with tears. What's wrong? I asked, suddenly unnerved by the intensity of his stare. He hesitated, voice trembling slightly, then finally spoke, words falling like thunderbolts, shattering the fragile peace I desperately maintained. I know why my mother died, he whispered. She didn't kill herself. A chill gripped my spine. My heart began racing violently. Kneeling before him, I grasped his shoulders firmly, desperately trying to steady my voice. What do you mean, Abdullah? He glanced around nervously, as if fearing unseen listeners. That night, Ami wasn't alone. He was there, my father. He threatened her. I saw them arguing before she sent me away. I didn't understand then, but now I remember clearly. Ami wasn't scared for herself. She was terrified for me. My breath caught painfully. Abdullah's revelation struck with blinding clarity, chilling me to the bone. Could Sidra's death have been murder disguised as suicide? Had Shawaiza's accusations been carefully constructed? Lies to mask a sinister truth? Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked softly, trying to mask my trembling. Because nobody would believe a child, he replied bitterly, sounding far older than his years. Not even you. Guilt flooded me instantly. While I'd fought tirelessly to protect Abdullah from external harm, I'd failed to recognize the storm raging within him. In his quietness, he'd carried a crushing burden alone, a truth powerful enough to tear our world apart. As night deepened around us, I understood painfully that our fight wasn't over. It had barely begun. My sister's ghost had whispered her story through her son's trembling voice, demanding justice. Now I was no longer a silent observer. I'd become a guardian bound by love and truth, compelled to confront the shadows lurking behind Sidra's tragic fate. Little did I know how dangerous uncovering the truth would become, and how much it would cost us all. One night, like every other night, I quietly entered Abdullah's room, a warm glass of milk in my hand. It had become a comforting ritual, my silent attempt to make him feel secure, protected. But tonight, as I approached him, something felt distinctly off. Abdullah's gaze lingered on me, unsettlingly intense, slowly moving from my head to my toes, his eyes carrying an expression far beyond his years. Here, I said gently, handing him the glass. Without a word, he drank it slowly, never breaking eye contact. Then setting the glass aside, he spoke quietly yet firmly. Don't bring milk tomorrow. Surprised, I asked softly, why, Abdullah? Don't you want milk anymore? He stared back defiantly, eyes suddenly older, harder. I'm not a child anymore. I don't want milk. And thinking perhaps he had grown tired of the monotony, I nodded silently and left. But his words lingered in my thoughts. The following night, hoping to entice him, I mixed some ruafsa into the milk, believing the sweetness might please him. But as soon as I approached, his expression hardened even further. I told you clearly, Auntie. I don't want milk, he said sharply. I am not a child. Stop treating me like one. Taken aback by his harsh tone, I gently asked, Then what do you want, Abdullah? His reply struck like lightning, jolting me to my core, robbing my breath and leaving my knees trembling. What came from this innocent-looking boy's mouth was so utterly shocking, so deeply inappropriate, that for a moment the world seemed to spin around me. Rage and disbelief surged simultaneously. How could a 12-year-old speak such words? Where had this darkness come from? My trust, so carefully nurtured, shattered instantly. Without a word, I rose abruptly, turning on trembling legs, fleeing to my own room. I sat heavily on the bed, cradling my head, fighting tears of confusion and anger. My husband, Shazaman, sensing my distress, asked sharply, What's wrong now? Why are you upset? But I offered no explanation, unable to find words for the horror of Abdullah's revelation. Inside me, a fierce battle raged. Was it my failure? Had I neglected something vital in Abdullah's upbringing? Did the fault lie with me? All night, tears streamed silently down my face as I wrestled with guilt and grief, haunted by memories of my late sister Sidra. I wondered if she had ever anticipated such darkness in her son. The next morning, as the children prepared for school, I called Abdullah aside. "Listen carefully," I whispered urgently, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Whatever you said last night, never repeat it, especially not where Shahzaman might hear. Do you understand the danger it could bring?" Abdullah avoided my gaze, his expression stubborn, yet somehow ashamed. "But Auntie," he murmured defiantly, "I didn't say anything wrong. I'm a man too, just like all the other men." Instantly, I pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him abruptly. My heart pounded furiously, my skin crawled with revulsion, but I maintained composure for both our sakes. Glancing nervously around, relieved that Shahzaman wasn't nearby, I pushed Abdullah gently toward the door, urging him to hurry out with my children. Once alone, I leaned heavily against the wall, breathing raggedly, consumed by panic. If Shahzaman learned even a hint of Abdullah's words, there'd be no restraining him. He already resented Abdullah's presence, always treating him as a burden forced upon him. One whisper of this shameful conversation, and he would instantly expel Abdullah from our home, perhaps violently. Yet beneath my fear lingered sadness. Abdullah was just a child, no matter how strangely he behaved. He'd endured unspeakable trauma, his mother's sudden death, abandonment by his father, relentless rejection by the only family he'd known. Perhaps his behavior was just a cry for help, distorted by pain I hadn't fully grasped. But that couldn't excuse the unsettling darkness I'd glimpsed. The entire day crawled by with unbearable anxiety. I obsessively replayed Abdullah's chilling words in my mind, seeking an explanation, a justification, but found none. Was it a product of isolation, exposure to something harmful? The influence of his father's twisted accusations about his mother's alleged immorality? My questions brought no clarity, only deeper despair. Nightfall came with suffocating dread. Mustering courage, I resolved to confront Abdullah once more, determined to salvage whatever innocence remained. Entering his room, carrying milk out of sheer habit, I set the glass down and sat beside him. My voice quivered slightly as I began, "Abdullah, I don't know what truly happened in your home. I don't even fully understand why your mother took her life. But what I do know is that she entrusted you to me, believing I would keep you safe. It's my duty, my sacred promise, to protect you and raise you right. Otherwise, what face will I show her on the day of judgment?" Gently, I extended the glass towards him. Abdullah stared coldly, refusing even to glance at the milk. With quiet, chilling confidence, he replied, "I don't want milk. I've told you exactly what I want." Before I could react, he leaned forward slowly, resting his head gently against my chest. A violent shiver passed through me, my entire body stiffening as though electrified. Instinctively, I placed my hands around his shoulders, yet felt nothing but dread. How could this innocent gesture fill me with such terrible unease? At that precise moment, Shahzaman burst impatiently into the room, his face darkened with irritation. "How long do you plan to sit here? Our children sleep promptly, but your nephew apparently doesn't need sleep." He spat sarcastically, deliberately emphasizing the word nephew, as if distancing himself further from Abdullah. I quickly withdrew, standing awkwardly. His gaze lingered suspiciously, a silent accusation flashing in his eyes. Without another word, I quietly followed my husband out of the room, leaving Abdullah behind in oppressive silence. Yet sleep evaded me again that night, my mind endlessly tormented by Abdullah's transformation. Innocent child or twisted soul. How had I failed to see this coming? Had Sidra sensed this darkness within her son? Did she know something I still couldn't fathom? I lay awake, haunted by the realization that my struggle had only just begun. The child I once saw as a fragile, innocent soul had revealed himself as something far more complex and disturbing. I had willingly become his guardian, committed to shielding him from harm. But who would shield me from the shadows now emerging within Abdullah himself? As dawn crept slowly over the horizon, cold dread settled in my heart, whispering darkly, perhaps the danger I'd feared from the outside world had already found a way inside, hidden within the quiet eyes of a child I thought I knew. Startled by Shahzaman's sudden appearance, Abdullah hastily withdrew, visibly trembling with fear, his reaction an all too common occurrence whenever my husband approached. Quickly I adjusted my dupatta, conscious of the suspicious glare Shazaman cast toward both of us. Without another word, I followed him quietly into our bedroom. Closing the door firmly behind me, I took a deep breath, summoning courage from deep within. My voice quivered slightly with suppressed anger as I confronted him. Please, Shazaman, stop using that harsh tone in front of Abdullah. He's just a child. He needs our support, not constant reminders of his unwanted presence. Shazaman's gaze hardened, eyes narrowing in suspicion and irritation. He's not as innocent as you think, he retorted coldly. Don't assume I'm blind to the way he finds excuses to stay close to you, whispering God knows what into your ear. I'm certain he's been making demands, expensive requests, forcing you into working day and night on your sewing machine, neglecting your own household. His accusations sent chills running down my spine. Fear surged, cold and heavy, as I looked away quickly, terrified he might sense the darker secret I'd been desperately concealing. That unsettling conversation with Abdullah haunted me constantly. If Shazaman ever learned of it, he would explode in uncontrollable rage and immediately cast Abdullah out onto the street. Or worse. Avoiding his gaze, I silently accepted the bundle of clothes he shoved roughly into my hands for ironing. Tears blurred my vision as I set to work, the hiss of steam matching the sound of my suppressed sobs. Once finished, exhausted and heartbroken, I placed his clothes aside and knelt quietly on the prayer mat, hoping to find solace, seeking guidance from the heavens. Thoughts of Sidra flooded my mind, wrenching my heart with unbearable grief. I missed her terribly. The day of our weddings flashed vividly through my memory. Two young brides, radiant with dreams, joyfully unaware of the hardships awaiting us both. Our parents had meticulously chosen educated and seemingly respectable families for us, yet no one can truly see behind closed doors. Often educated people conceal the most profound ignorance, the deepest cruelty behind their polished facades. My own mother-in-law was a living example of such cruelty. Outwardly polite, she wore a mask of dignity, yet behind my back, she fed Shazaman endless venom against Abdullah and me. Her shrill voice often echoed through our home, berating Abdullah with lies she knew were false. My son's hard-earned money is being wasted on you. Because of you, he struggles day and night, she would shout, knowing fully well that Abdullah's expenses were covered entirely by my sewing income, painstakingly earned, stitch by stitch. Sometimes, engulfed by sadness, I would reflect on how carefree Sidra and I had been before marriage, sisters exploring life side by side. Gradually, marriage changed us both, placing us into separate cages. Sidra, however, was imprisoned far worse than I was. Each time I met her, I watched helplessly as the bright smile that once lit her face dimmed slowly into silent suffering. During rare visits to our parents' house, she glanced nervously at the clock, always anxious to return to her oppressive home. Eventually, even those sparse visits stopped. Sidra became a ghost, unreachable and silent. Once her husband had created a scene at our door, accusing me bitterly of poisoning his wife's mind against him and his family. His shouting had echoed painfully through our street, humiliating me and inciting Shazaman's wrath. From that day, my husband despised Sidra's mere existence. He forbade our meetings, separating two sisters who'd once shared everything. Perhaps that deep resentment was why, when Sidra left Abdullah with me as an amanat, a sacred trust, Shazaman's heart remained cold, utterly indifferent. But now circumstances had shifted dramatically. Sidra had left this cruel world, and Abdullah had no one but me. Yet the disgrace unjustly placed upon my sister's name refused to fade. Wherever I turned, whispers of scandal and betrayal followed relentlessly. Especially painful were the barbs from my mother-in-law. Her words, sharpened with contempt, pierced mercilessly into my soul. Who knows whose sin that boy is carrying? Your sister wasn't disowned without reason. Shawwais knew well enough Abdullah wasn't his. Why else would he cast out his own son? Yet here you are bringing filth into our home. Each cruel word twisted painfully inside me, but I held my silence, focusing solely on protecting Abdullah from their poisonous accusations. Even though it meant swallowing my pride daily, enduring humiliation for a child who carried Sidra's face and innocence within him, I did so willingly. Abdullah was my sister's final plea, the last trace of her shattered dreams left behind in my care. Yet as I struggled daily to shield him, doubts crept silently into my heart. Abdullah had changed. Something had hardened within him. The child I desperately wanted to protect now concealed shadows I couldn't decipher. Had the pain and rejection he faced awakened something darker within him? Was the innocence I fought so fiercely to defend already slipping from my grasp? I glanced toward Abdullah's closed door, dreading what secrets lay behind it. Suddenly I felt utterly alone, caught between loyalty to my sister's memory and the disturbing reality unfolding within my home. A storm was brewing silently beneath the fragile peace I had struggled to maintain. As darkness deepened around me, I whispered a desperate prayer into the emptiness, hoping someone above might listen, someone who could untangle this intricate web of secrets and lies before it destroyed us all. Little did I know the darkness I feared had already begun its quiet descent, creeping closer with each passing night. I had grown accustomed to overhearing hurtful remarks, sharp whispers, accusatory glances, subtle taunts thrown carelessly around me. My only struggle was to keep these cruel words from reaching Shahzaman's ears, knowing his temper could explode at even the smallest provocation. Yet despite my cautiousness, Abdullah had quietly absorbed every bitter word. It changed him, stole away his innocence, and matured him far beyond his 13 years. One evening, when I handed him his usual glass of milk, he pushed it away with unexpected firmness. His voice was steady, mature beyond his years. "Auntie, please stop treating me like a child. I don't want milk anymore. I'm grown up. I need to start working. How long will you silently bear insults because of me? How long will you exhaust yourself sewing clothes day and night just to keep me fed?" My heart sank at his words, feeling crushed beneath a wave of sadness. At an age when my own children demanded video games and special treats, Abdullah spoke of earning wages at a roadside shop. I saw clearly now the deep wound of inferiority etched into his soul. "Absolutely not," I said firmly, my voice trembling. "Never speak like this again. If your uncle hears, he'll withdraw you from school and push you straight into labor. Your education is far more important than earning a few pennies." But Abdullah was resolute, driven by a burning desire to free me from humiliation and hardship. Just 2 days later, he announced defiantly, "I found a job at a brick kiln. I'll work there after school and return late at night." His innocent declaration brought tears streaming down my cheeks. Grasping his thin shoulders, I pleaded, "Please, Abdullah, don't do this. Let me handle Shahzaman. I'll stand up to him, fight if I must, but your education and your needs are my responsibility." That evening, when Shahzaman learned Abdullah planned to labor at the kiln, his reaction was predictably ruthless. "If he's so eager to work, let him quit school altogether. Let him sleep at the kiln too, since he prefers labor to studying." Fury ignited within me, a protective instinct I never knew I possessed. My voice rose with sharp defiance. "If that's your attitude, perhaps our son Adisham should also quit school and sleep at the kiln. Both boys are the same age, so why discriminate between them? If my sister's child can't study, neither can ours." "You've completely lost your mind," Shahzaman snapped, shocked by my rebellion. But this time, seeing my unwavering resolve, he retreated quietly, finally silenced by my determination. Abdullah reluctantly agreed to abandon his idea of working, allowing me once more to shoulder the full burden of his expenses. Time gradually softened Abdullah's isolation. Slowly, through his gentle ways, he found a path into Shahzaman's closed heart, quietly winning his reluctant affection. Then, unexpectedly, Shahwaiz appeared on our doorstep one day, visibly weak and gravely ill. He stood trembling, his eyes lowered in shame. "Please forgive me," he murmured hoarsely. "I have come to take Abdullah back. All those accusations against Sidra were lies, wicked fabrications. I had fallen in love with another woman and wanted an easy path out. I thought Sidra's death cleared my way. I married that woman, but fate delivered its own judgment. I contracted a terminal illness through her. Now I hover between life and death." Taking out papers from his trembling hands, he handed them directly to Abdullah. "I have transferred all my property to your name. Forgive your father if you can." Abdullah stared silently for a moment before finally embracing him gently, whispering words of forgiveness that filled the air with healing grace. Yet, despite reconciling, Abdullah chose to stay with me, the woman who had raised him through every storm. The moment Abdullah's inheritance was revealed, my mother-in-law's spiteful tongue fell silent. Shahzaman, too, had long ceased his cruel remarks, humbled by Abdullah's unwavering patience. Soon after, life threw yet another curveball. Shahzaman fell seriously ill. His health deteriorated rapidly, leaving him fragile, helpless, and dependent. Ironically, it was Abdullah, not our own son, Etisham, who stood steadfastly by his side, handling doctors, medicines, and hospital visits with unwavering devotion. Etisham, spoiled by his father's indulgence, lacked the emotional maturity to cope. But Abdullah quietly took responsibility for the man who had once rejected him. His compassionate care astonished everyone, slowly nursing Shahzaman back to health, and more importantly, healing the bitter divisions in our family. As Shahzaman recovered, a profound change occurred within him. His eyes, once harsh and unforgiving, softened with newfound gratitude. Abdullah's compassion melted away the remnants of bitterness, finally making our household whole. After completing his studies, Abdullah used his inheritance wisely, launching a thriving business that flourished beyond expectations. His success silenced every lingering whisper, replacing suspicion with admiration. The child whose existence had once burdened us all had become the backbone of our family's honor. Yet amidst the quiet pride, a deep sorrow lingered within me. Sidra's absence remained a haunting reminder of the cruelty inflicted by society's judgments. Her precious life was cut tragically short, crushed under the unbearable weight of unfounded accusations, driven to death by the cruelty of the man she once trusted most. Watching Abdullah thrive, I often wondered how different our lives might have been if society had shown kindness instead of cruelty, compassion instead of suspicion. The world's harsh judgments had destroyed my innocent sister, and though Abdullah had overcome tremendous adversity, Sidra would never return. And in moments of quiet reflection, I silently prayed for a day when no one else would be sacrificed at the altar of ignorance and prejudice. A world where dignity was preserved, justice prevailed, and innocence was never again betrayed.